Welcome to the All Things Real Estate Podcast with our very own Josh Barker. With more than 20 years of experience and over 5,000 properties sold, Josh brings a unique perspective to the real estate market. Let's get started.
Unlike other podcasts, this particular podcast has a lot of content that's just strictly our opinion. Do not take this content and start to use it to disseminate across your real estate brokerages or clients. Please don't use this as the facts going forward. There's a lot of information here. It's all opinion-based. Seek an attorney's counsel before you do anything else.
Hey, Josh, how's it going?
It's going good.
I knew you were going to laugh.
Well, we've been laughing. Now that they said roll, and the guy over here is telling us we have to stop laughing so much, so I guess we'll have to get serious. Get serious, Joey.
Okay, I'm going to get real serious.
All right.
Because it's been a month, but it's been a little over a month, but it's been a pretty active month.
It has been.
Some serious stuff has gone down. There was
Really? I haven't noticed.
Didn't notice. So I don't normally have notes, but I've got these notes here.
Oh.
And it's because I wanted to quote the headlines exactly, and I'm going to mess it up anyway. But like, for example, CNN says the 6% commission on buying or selling a home is gone.
Thank goodness for that.
ABC News, real estate lawsuit settlement upends policies that help set agent commissions.
Okay.
CBS News, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of all around. There was a big legal, it wasn't court, it was just a settlement, right? Legal settlement.
Right.
Including the National Association of Realtor, NAR.
Yeah.
So this is some heavy duty stuff. What's your opinion?
Okay. Well.
Oh, wait. Before you even get started.
Okay.
How long have you been in real estate?
I've been in real estate for 24 years. We've had our own brokerage since 2003.
And if you had to guess, how many transactions do you think you've been a part of?
Oh man. Well over 7,000 transactions.
So I'm just doing some math in my head. That's like well over $1 billion. That's north of $1 billion in sales with a B.
Yeah. A couple billion probably.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. I just wanted to get that out there. So if somebody's never seen you before, they go, who's this guy? Why does he think he can talk about NAR or anything?
Well, in full disclosure, my opinion's still worth nothing. So just start there.
Okay. Well, is CNN and ABC News, is it true? Is the sky falling on real estate?
Oh, it's not falling. I think this is an incredible opportunity for the consumers. We're incredibly excited about what's coming down the pipe. It's been years right now that we've been frustrated about how the industry has been operating. And I'm not going to pass judgment on it. I think there was a reason it was operating the way it was. It's just, but like all things, sometimes as technology catches up and we learn better ways to do things, and sometimes the industries don't improve and they need to, it takes a sweeping policy change like this to happen.
So I think to the average person, do they even know what the National Association of Realtors is? We hear the term realtor,
right? And
it's like a legal trademark term,
right?
Like you can't just because you have a real estate license does not mean you're a realtor.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is like NAR a government entity, or is it what is it?
All right. That's fair. So, to start off with, to give you guys some context for those listening, what NAR is. NAR is a National Association of Realtors, and it's a trade organization related to real estate. And if you've heard the word CAR, that's California Association of Realtors, and they're related. Okay. So CAR falls underneath NAR on the organizational structure. But what they really do is that they have some tangible and some intangible benefits. So the tangible ones that real estate agents see on a regular basis are going to be things like contracts. Okay? Standardized contracts, right? The second one would be, lock boxes. Okay, and having access to lock boxes. And then another one would be the multiple listing service itself, which is a really efficient way to present consistent information for the consumer to consume. And it's fairly up to date within typically minutes, right? And so I want you to imagine for a minute a world without that. You'd have 50 different variations of a contract. And no real estate agents, unless you were an attorney practicing law, you wouldn't be able to decipher them. Because it's the standardized contract, what makes it easier for agents to work together. Because if you know the contract, then you're able to interpret it and share it with your client, right?
And it protects the consumer. I think the average person is intimidated by legal jargon.
Yeah,
right. Henceforth, hitherto, therefore, I got you.
Yeah, I got you. Right.
And the standardization of this helps both sides. Really.
Oh yeah, and it's so standard now that agents just fill in boxes. Right, and they still screw that up, by the way.
Some,
but they literally fill in boxes, and so these contracts have been written by attorneys, and they've been, combed and really analyzed by legal professionals. And now it's at a point where, most agents that are in the business and know what they're doing, they know how to read those standard contracts. If you were to throw 5 or 6 different types of contracts at us, and it's not something we're familiar with, now we're saying, well, in addition to, working with a broker, you're going to have to go see an attorney also. In some states you already have to.
I was going to say, in some states they do that.
Yeah, in some states you already have to. But for us in California, and for anybody watching, that's where this is coming out of, that those contracts are a really big deal. And so that's where CAR comes in. Now, those are tangible. Then the non-tangibles, the harder things to see, is that they do advocate for property rights. They do advocate for home ownership, and they do a lot of legislative types of initiatives that, you don't see maybe every single day, but they're hard at work doing those things. And so it's a very valid organization for sure.
So this legal settlement that was NAR settled with out of what, like Missouri, I think it was?
Yeah, Missouri brought the case.
What were they saying? What was why?
Sure. So the case, anybody could just go online and look at it if you wanted to try to find it. But essentially what it was is that sellers in a class action lawsuit filed a suit against multiple brokers, large brokers, and the National Association of Realtors, claiming that sellers were overpaying in commissions because they were being, from their perspective, in some ways forced to pay a buyer broker commission. And that's kind of the nuts and bolts of that case. And it's much more in depth than that, because even the settlement agreement, I think, is 108 pages long. But what happened is that NAR came out on Friday last week and basically said, okay, we don't, they said that they didn't want to admit to any wrongdoing, but they do recognize that the industry is changing. And for that reason, they're going to change some of their policies, which we have to follow if we want to be realtors. They're changing some of their policies, which will give us some flexibility on how compensation is paid from sellers or buyers.
Like how so? So like right now, the standard is, if I'm going to sell my home, I list it with you,
right,
and I agree to a commission for you, as well as to offer a commission to the buyer's agent.
There you go.
Right? That's like standard.
Pretty
Has
standard.
been forever.
Yeah.
But
so
that's changing.
It's going to change. So right now, under the current arrangement, I come and meet with you at your home. You and your lovely wife and yourself sit down with me. We have a conversation. We talk about, what we're going to do to market your home and promote it. We discuss what we think the pricing would be. And then we review what we consider to be commission, where I say, hey, Joy, here's what we're going to charge you for the services we rendered. And just for this conversation, let's say I was saying I was going to charge you 6%, right? Mm-hmm. And I say, now, Joy, when I charge you the 6%, with your permission, what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer half of this commission to the multiple listing service to incentivize all other brokers in the marketplace. I'd like to help them be enthusiastic about wanting to come and show your home as well. So we'll list it at 6%, but 3% of the percent I'm going to offer to the cooperating broker. Are you okay with that?
It's standard.
Yeah, it's standard,
Yes.
right? And the sellers typically would say, okay, well, that's fine. Or they negotiate maybe at 5% or whatever. I mean, these things are negotiable. And then at that point, I would list the property for sale. We, bring it to the multiple listing service. But here's where it gets important. We would then publish on the multiple listing service for other brokers to see how much commission they would receive in the event they brought us an offer that the seller chose to accept. And so it kind of created this playing field, if you will, where even brand new agents in the business could come into the business and not really be good at what they do yet, but their commission was protected because it was already published to the MLS. So they didn't have to negotiate for their fee, right? They didn't have to negotiate for it. In fact, in most cases, because it was in writing on the MLS, they didn't have to even do a good job. And if the deal closed, they were still going to get paid. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
And that's the way it has been. Mm-hmm. What they've changed now, the two biggest things that they've changed is, number one, is that no longer can you advertise that commission on the multiple listing service. And the second thing they've done now is they've come out and said that prior to a buyer viewing a property with a broker, they must first sign a buyer-broker agreement, which explains what services the broker is about to offer the buyer and what the cost will be in that relationship. Who's paying for what? How does an agent get paid? And who's going to be paying the agent?
So they have to, So a buyer, if I'm going to buy a home, normally, you and I meet, you take me out, you show me houses. Yeah. But I mean, every realtor has the horror story of you showed somebody 20 houses and they stopped at an open house one day without you. Yeah. And the listing agent double-ended and you're like, dude, I showed you 20 houses. Sorry, man. She told me if I didn't put an offer in right then, I was going to lose that house. Like, sounds like you ran into a salesperson. Anyway, but now you're saying before you even take me out to look at homes, we have to have a contract in place.
Yeah. My understanding is from what CARS or what National Association of Realtors is settling on, subject to change because still the judge still needs to sign off on the settlement agreement.
Got it.
But the way that it's saying right now is that prior to a agent taking a buyer out to show them a property, they must first execute a buyer-broker agreement between the buyer and the broker that basically states, hey, here's what our scope of services are going to look like at this moment. Here's how it would be paid if you decide to buy the home. And then both parties sign this document. And so now, which is great, I think this is a really good thing, the buyers now get to actually actively participate in the negotiation of what the agent receives that they're working with. Where before, it was published to the MLS, so that's what the agent was going to get paid, right?
Got it.
And in most cases, the buyers probably already knew it, but they also knew that they weren't really actively involved in that negotiation very often. And so as a result, they didn't get to negotiate what that fee might be for the agent. Now that's going to change. Now the buyers are going to have the opportunity, if they choose to negotiate with the buying broker and determine what that buying broker deserves to receive for the services that the buyer is asking for. And so it's going to change things because a brand new agent without any experience, that's going to be a tough sell because now you're going to have to compare the services of a broker that might have been doing this for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, whatever. And I think from a buyer's perspective, now the question will be, how many problems do you know how to solve? How many issues have you been able to resolve? How good are you at reviewing title reports, negotiating contracts, determining how to negotiate through repairs and problems? Because you're about to pay that agent. The buyer's about to pay that agent for those services in the future. And so I would call it that the TikTok stars probably aren't going to be as popular now because now that they're paying for the service, or at least, it's really transparent now that they're paying for it. Mm-hmm. Now it's going to be more like, I want to work with somebody competent. One of the examples I would give you would be, let's say that I had a legal issue and I have access to, 2 different attorneys at about the same cost. One attorney's brand new, nice person, but brand new. Or another one that's been doing it for 15 or 20 years and has a proven track record for resolving issues like mine. Which one will I likely hire?
Got it.
And I think that's kind of what that side of the equation is going to look like going forward. And then the opposite side, the listing side, the sellers now will likely be in a position where they can choose to have an agent list their home for sale. And the agent's going to list the home based on what they're going to charge for the listing side. And then they'll bring the home to the market. And then probably based on demand will dictate how much the seller feels they need to compensate a cooperating broker, if at all.
Because I'm thinking that, the property itself is going to have an impact on that listing.
Absolutely.
If you have some obscure property that's, there's just not a lot of buyers for it.
Yep.
You're going to try to incentivize the buyer's agent more.
That's right.
To try to find, you're just trying to open up the net more. Versus, there's some properties we've talked about, like the minute the sign hits the street, it's sold. Why? Because everybody wants that house.
Yeah.
It's just, and so the idea that there would be one standard commission offered regardless, it kind of makes sense. Like, no, no.
It makes total sense. And this is where, as a company, we're going to lean into this really hard. We are super excited for it because I really do believe that the cost associated with a real estate transaction is a little too high at this point. And I think most people in my position have been doing this for a long time, probably feel the same way. When I first started selling real estate, the average sales price in the market was $108,000, right?
Yeah.
And commissions, let's say, just for the sake of argument, were 6% at that time. That means that each side was receiving about a $3,000 compensation, and then you had to split with your broker, and then you had the cost associated with even doing the transaction, which is, your gas and your time and everything else. But the fees were set at a pretty nominal amount because the costs for homes were a lot less back then.
Got it.
But here's what it was like to sell back then. This is what's different too, and this is what's changed in 25 years. Back then, the multiple listing service was not online. So we would run black and white classified ads. A buyer would call. We'd show them a home. And if they liked the home, great, we'd write an offer for them. And if they didn't, I'd have to show them like 25 other homes because there was no internet to preview. So they had to go see everything before they felt educated enough to say, okay, I like that one the best, right?
Yeah.
Today, the buyers are doing most of the work. Buyers are going out and looking at all the neighborhoods. They're looking at all the homes online. They're seeing all the photographs. They're already narrowing it down to probably 3 to 5 homes that they're really interested in anyway. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so the agent's not doing as much as they used to, yet the fee is still the same.
No, I agreed. You know, we joked. I've said that before that I felt like the professionalism in real estate was varied. It was heavily varied. You'd run into some, you know, I think a lot of people think about real estate and they forget about, you've touched upon a little bit, like there's a lot of legality in there. There's a lot of gotchas. There's inspections. There's understanding how to truly read title and escrow. And a lot of it is, when you brought up the TikTok star, a lot of it's that just being able to market a personality, and like, that's such a tiny piece, if it's even a piece compared to.
Well, it has been a piece lately.
It's been a piece in, well, we live in a social media world.
Yeah.
So it's been pretty dominant, but that idea of like, hey, you know, upon further review, we need to negotiate the price of this house. You know, if I'm representing the buyer, why? Well, because, you know, you're going to have to replace this, this, and this. Like, you know, you don't see most of that stuff until you get into an escrow and you start. That's the whole reason you do these inspections, and that's the whole reason you get these professionals involved. And I don't even think I don't think the average person truly thinks about that when they think about real estate. I think they think marketing and sales.
And I think part of it's because the way the industry had been set up in the past. You know, having the published commission on the multiple listing service essentially allowed for a lot of inexperienced agents, if you will, right, to participate because they didn't have to be skilled to get paid.
That's right.
And now the industry is shifting to the point where it's going to be based on merit. You know, you're going to have to truly display to a buyer or to a seller your ability to help them solve their problem at the highest level at the best possible cost to them. That's what's going to happen now. That's what's changed. And I think from a seller's perspective now, it's going to likely save them quite a bit in terms of compensation. You know, if you think about it, if you're a new home subdivision, right? And let's say I have buyers that are literally lined all the way out my subdivision wanting to buy my home. All of my homes. I don't have to, as a builder at that point, offer a lot of concessions. I may not be willing to work with your broker. I may not be willing to do a buyer credit at closing. I may not be willing to accept some of those contingencies, right?
Absolutely.
Now, if nobody's coming into my subdivision and nobody's coming in, the script flips.
Yep.
Now I'm heavily incentivized to increase my compensation to a buyer, maybe saying, hey, I'll pay some credits towards your closing cost, or, hey, I would be happy to pay your broker if they want to bring us a buyer. Or, hey, I'd be willing to do this or do that. And so it really is going to come to your point you said a little earlier about it's going to come down to the product itself. And then now you're going to have a more of a custom designed marketing plan based on that unique property. You know what I mean? So, you know, to your point earlier, if I have a really high desired property in a subdivision that's priced well and shows great, as a seller, I may only list my property at half the fee it used to list it for, and I may not offer an incentive to another office. It doesn't mean I won't receive an offer from another office through my agent requesting some compensation, but whether or not I'm willing to agree to that is going to come down to how much activity I probably have on the property at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
And these buyer broker agreements will most likely have the cost being placed on the buyer, right? You know, so let's say that a fee that's half of what it used to be now, a fee for a buyer broker representation, but they'll try to negotiate it when they make the offer on the property. They'll try to negotiate it with the seller to have the seller pay it. But if it's not agreeable, the buyer has to decide, well, I'm going to pay my agent or not.
The two things that come to mind when you were saying that was, number one is lenders. And usually, because there's constraints on the type of loan you get where you get seller credits, things like that. So that's going to start to come into play.
Sure.
And the other thing is, I was wondering is if the buyer's commission is going to be registered as part of the sale price, because if it's not, then suddenly the price of homes is going to come down, I don't know, around 2.5% on average, right? Because before, if I sold my house for $300,000 and I said, I'm offering 6%, it records at $300,000 and that comes out of it. But if a buyer's commission, is that still going to record?
No.
Has that even been addressed, or is that going to be a separate issue?
Well, I mean, now you got the county assessor going, oh, wait a minute, everything's going to be reassessed.
I don't know. Yeah, is it?
Well, I think, to your point, I think a percentage of the transactions, the buyer will ultimately come out of pocket and pay for their buyer representation.
Yeah.
Because they would rather keep the tax basis lower on the purchase, right?
But then does that mean it can't be part of the loan? I mean,
Well,
there's a couple of little legal moves here.
Yeah,
that are,
there's some
you know
things
what
that
I
have to
mean?
get figured out, but I'm not as hung up on like how to get someone paid. I'm not, because let's say that there's a house that's been on the market for, let's say, a month and it hasn't sold yet.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that the agent that has that listing listed it, at a commission that didn't offer a cooperating broker a commission. Okay, that's fine. My buyer broker agreement I have with my buyer states that, I'm going to be charging them, let's say, 2.5% or whatever, right?
Okay.
For broker services. Okay. And now I'm going to go make an offer on that listing, and I'm going to include in that a compensation agreement requesting the seller to pay me a commission so that my buyer doesn't have to. Do you get what I'm saying?
Totally.
And these agreements, the way they are today, that's how it works. But that they might change that between now and July, how they're going to introduce that. Now, the question that people might ask is, well, what happens if the buyer needs a credit also? That's fine. Just write your offer just like you do today and have it include a credit to the buyer at closing. So there's going to be a lot of different ways, and maybe lenders might change their way of what they cap out on for total credits. One of the things somebody asked me recently was like, well, what happens if the lender only allows for a 3% credit? And how do you do it? Well, then have your request broker commission for your commission portion, and then still ask for the credit for what the buyer needs to get their loan. So there's going to be some maneuvering in there, but I think that fundamentally, the cost for the consumer, which is what I'm super excited about, is the cost for the consumer is going to go down, and it should.
I think so too. The two things that I thought were, number one, the cost to consumer is going to go down just a little bit, probably a couple of points. But the other side is that the I don't know the right way to put this, the professionalism of the buyer's agent is going to go up dramatically.
It has to.
Yeah.
Because when the buyer gets to participate in the negotiation of what their agent is being paid,
Mm-hmm.
then that agent better be good at what they do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to be able to justify that fee. I mean, it's just like sellers today. Sellers typically interview 3 or 4 agents. It's a competitive interview. They evaluate the marketing plan. They evaluate the pricing strategy. They evaluate the agent and determine who they think will likely get them where they want to be in the best position they can be in. It's competitive. And I see that happening now on the buyer side at a much higher level than it has in the past, because, I mean, we can argue about who has been paying. Some people say, well, no, the seller has always been paying. And some people say, well, no, the buyer does pay too, because if the seller wasn't paying, then the buyer would be. There's all those exchanges of conversation.
Totally.
And I think we can debate that. But I would say that there's one thing that's for sure that probably nobody would debate. Fees are going to go down, and they're going to come out of the agents.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And I also think because I was a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And one of the hard things when you're the buyer's agent is how you can work with people. And because some people would get that the whole buyer's agency agreement is not brand new. It's been around. It's just not the most common practice. You don't normally, don't get it. But the horror stories of you work with buyers versus when you work with a seller, like you said, the seller interviews 3 agents. They go with who brings them the best marketing plan, et cetera, et cetera. Buyers were much more product focused.
Sure.
So that's why they could just be driving down the road, and even though Johnny has shown them, or Lisa has shown them 20 homes, they're like, "Hey, look, house for sale. Sorry." And it kind of, I felt like what's the right way to put it? I felt like it dampened that professionalism in the buyer's agent. It got more of that just like, hey.
Highly transactional.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I feel like, no, this is going to.
More relational.
This is going to be way more relational.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somebody who does focus on being a buyer's agent is, believe it or not, even though their commission might come down, I think they're going to benefit from this. Because I think a lot of that, there's a lot of anxiety for buyers agents because they're put in, they'll do so much work and not get anything and have it just taken away from them in the last minute.
Yeah. And
I think that I just don't think that's a good, healthy thing for that group of people. Because we can sit here and say that there's a lack of professionalism sometimes, but there's on the other side of the coin is I have met a bunch of agents that work their butt off and get burned.
Yeah, that's a really good point you bring up. And well, to your point, the National Association of Realtors, part of the settlement agreement, their members will be required to execute a buyer-broker agreement prior to showing a property.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
So yeah, I think it's going to memorialize the relationship. It's going to explain the process. It's going to talk about how people get paid and who pays them. and very transparent, which is what I'm really excited about. And I think that ultimately where we're going to go with this is that you're going to unfortunately likely see a certain amount of agents likely leave the business as a result, because now skill and experience is going to really matter, particularly on the buyer agent side.
I think it's also going to be, I think we were already seeing this, but I think that the lone wolf McQuaid agent, McQuaid, I think the lone wolf agent, it's harder because a good team includes the people that are really the legal people versus the people that are much more about going out in the field. And in the past, that like one agent all by yourself, you're expected to wear a lot of hats.
Oh yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to help build these teams a little bit better because, yeah, this one agent's great. Hey, I'm going to show you your house. Well, what about the legal? Hey, hold on. Let's get the legal agent in our office engaged, and let's get the marketing agent in our office, and we work as a team now.
That's right.
And I think when that happens, the consumer, whether you're selling or buying, you get a way better experience.
Oh yeah. No, the value proposition I think is going to strengthen as a result. And like I said, I really do think the quality and experience of the agent is going to improve. And not that you can't get into the business as a new agent and be able to build through those ranks, but you won't be able to get in there and be a fly-by-night agent that's just, running around and enjoying, how easy it is, the way that things were set up in the past.
I think the comparison between real estate and legal is you see it a lot. And I think when you think about legal, you usually see like a partnership, and there's partners, and there's senior partners, and junior partners come in and they shadow senior partners, and they work as a team. And in real estate, that exists. It exists here. Yeah. But it also the lone wolf, the cowboys that can just. And I've often thought, and like you said, it's not to put down new agents at all, but I think it's really hard to come into real estate and be a master at something you just started.
Yeah, and you better have a mentor.
Yes.
Yeah, and you better be, surrounded, like you said, by middle-level partners or senior partners and people that are willing to invest and pour into you to help you, grow and to learn and to develop. Because, again, I think that consumers now, with this transparency that we're about to see bestowed upon us in July, which is going to be a good thing, I think it's going to come also with a heavy burden of contract proficiency, a legal mind, and the ability to really navigate clients through problems and situations that pop up. And they're going to want to see that track record. You're going to have to articulate your value proposition at the highest level going forward.
So I think in closing, I don't know if there's anything else you want to address on, because we went over like the main points of like this is a big deal, and people are running around like the sky's falling, but it's like, no, calm down. Yeah.
Well, and it's fresh. I mean, it just came out on Friday, but you and I talked about it before the podcast. Like, what do you want to cover? And I'm like, this is all we're hearing about right now. The consumers when we're in the marketplace, they're all asking us the questions about what does this mean, and so. This is our first, shot across the bow, if you will, of this is what we think it means. And I can't express this enough. I mean, everything that we just discussed in this podcast, it's my opinion. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's going to fall into fact by any means. Consult with your own attorneys about this stuff going forward, because this is just a podcast with some ideas of how we're interpreting it at this point. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of ground that has to be covered between now and July. And there's a lot of wrinkles that are going to need to be ironed out between now and July. And I think at that point, we'll have a better understanding of how the whole industry is going to navigate, this whole issue going forward. But so far, I'm really happy and excited of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And even though this just came out Friday, this has been in the works for several months. There's been several things have happened that said, hey, this is coming.
That's right.
There's been legal action. There's been settlements. There's been a lot going on with different entities. Yep. And so this isn't like blindsided. It's not like Thursday, no one thought anything was coming. Everybody's been kind of like, how is this going to play out?
Yeah. No, the professionals have been paying attention.
Yeah. And this is a big step. I mean, obviously if they had this settlement, I mean, they've been probably working on the settlement for months.
No. And some of the most astute brokers in the country have been on mastermind conversations and calls for months. Waiting to see, how this thing was going to unfold. And honestly, the way it's unfolding, I don't know if it could have unfolded any better. I think it's a good thing.
Right on. Okay. Well, in closing, is there anything like to the consumer, to other agents, or anything you'd like to convey? Or, I mean, I feel like we've hit it.
Watch the whole podcast in its entirety if you can, because I think that, instead of trying to rehash the last 30 minutes, I mean, you'd probably want to dissect it. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But more to come. We'll be covering more and more as we go forward.
Awesome. Well, right. Josh, I appreciate your time, and I'll See you in about a month.
Sounds good, Joey. Thanks, buddy.
Bye.
If you're enjoying the All Things Real Estate podcast, please feel free to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.